ever notice how a conversation can change without anyone raising their voice? Nobody argues, nobody shouts, nobody hangs up the phone, but somehow everything feels different. Maybe you've experienced it, especially with family and friends, your co-workers, or in a partnership, or even in a business relationship. The words become more careful and the tone changes. The trust, it feels different. And before you realize it, you're no longer having the same conversations. Well, that's exactly what happened to Luke and me. Because by the middle of August 2025, until then, every WhatsApp message felt like two people trying to build the same house. We asked questions, the contractor answered. We asked questions, the architect responded. Sometimes we laughed, sometimes we were disappointed, sometimes I was frustrated, sometimes I was so frightened, sometimes I was even angry. But through it all, it felt like we were working towards the same goal. Then one word entered the conversation: lawyer. Looking back now, I realized that wasn't the beginning of a legal issue. It was the beginning of a relationship changing. Because from April, we were asking about this roof. May, June, July, August. As a fisherman's daughter, I learned something growing up in our fishing village. Sometimes the sea doesn't warn you with big waves. Back home we would say, when that wave come and buckle you up. Sometimes the tide changes underneath your boat long before you realize. You're drifting long before you even know that you were. And looking back, mid-August 2025 was that moment. Welcome back to Building Back Home with Jackie.
Yeah, man, the vision's strong. Building back home where I belong. Ooh, yeah. But every foundation got a story to tell about the unseen cracks and the caution bell. So come walk with me through the sun and the rain. On Jackie's journey, we gon' rise again with full support.
In this episode, I'm sharing my personal observations about how communication evolved during our home building journey. When I mention legal notice, documentation, or changes in communication, I'm simply describing what Luke and I experienced as homeowners. I'm not making conclusions about anyone's intentions or their motives. My goal is to share lessons about communication, documentation, and project management for anyone building from abroad. Before we continue, I also want to say something it's very important to me. This podcast is not meant to discourage anyone from building back home in Barbados. I have family and friends, and Luke and I know people throughout the diaspora who have built beautiful homes in Barbados with little or no major issues. And Barbados has many skilled professionals, reputable contractors, and some successful construction projects. Our family's experience is simply just one journey, our journey. And my hope is that by sharing both our challenges and our lessons learned, that you'll better prepare yourselves to ask questions, document your decisions, and hopefully enjoy a smoother and better building experience than we did. And as always, I invite you to listen to this podcast with two hats on. One as someone enjoying the story, the other as someone asking yourselves, what would I have done? Story time. This episode is going to be filled with actual voice messages, WhatsApp conversations, letters, and project documents recorded while everything was unfolding. As the conversations changed, so did the relationship. The roof had once again been promised. Remember? Promised for next week. We were discussing adjustments to our custom windows once the roof was finally in place. At the same time, I was keeping everyone updated about the storms affecting our overseas shipment. I think the last report I had is that it was stuck in Colombia. So the project schedule could be adjusted accordingly. Every day, though, Luke and I kept asking the same simple question: when will the roof be poured? Each answer seemed to move the date a little further down the calendar. Do you remember how episode 7 ended? We had also begun talking about something much more concerning: the exposed roof steel, and whether it needed to be scrubbed, whether anti-rust protection should be applied before the concrete was finally poured. And as the days passed, our concerns grew. We were now in the middle of hurricane season. Communication became heavier, the tone became more formal. Family representatives, which was my brother and Luke's brother, began visiting the site. Language barriers with a worker created a new challenge. Words like lawyer, legal advice, quantity surveyor, and contract breach began replacing conversations that just weeks earlier had simply been about building our family home. Looking back now, this wasn't just the story of a delayed roof. It was a story of communication changing. One message, one phone call, one document at a time. We were now in the middle of August, and believe it or not, we were again still talking about the roof. Think about that for a moment, because it says April 2025, this roof was supposed to be poured. April came, no roof. May, still no roof. June, no roof. And then you and I and Luke, we traveled down to Barbados in July of 2025, her daughter. Still, we return, no roof. Just more promises and more disappointment. We're in August, and then on August 14th, the contractor sent a message explaining that there had been an accident involving the concrete supplier and how he had fell off a building. By that point, we were really reaching our breaking point. Because after receiving that update, though, I wrote, "Good evening, everyone. Luke had someone inspect the roof today. Only a section of the steel had been scrubbed and sealed. Please make certain the remainder is completed as soon as possible. And at contractor by name, where is the quotation that was promised?" If you recalled, we were starting to talk about retaining, maybe he'll look out for quotes from other suppliers so we can move forward. Nothing. But that one message captures exactly where our conversation had reached. Steel, concrete, suppliers, quotation, payments, delays, waiting and asking once again, when will the roof be poured? At the same time, Luke and I were preparing for our custom windows and doors to arrive, making sure that the site would be ready, making sure measurements had been confirmed, making sure that everything was coordinated. What we didn't know was that our shipment would soon be delayed again, and I told you, by the storms at sea. Now listen to my voice message to the contractor on August 19th. Names removed for privacy.
This has become to the point now that we're going to have to. I'm going to send you my thoughts in a note, and I'll put it in this said chat so we all can see where we are. Confirmed that you have not reached out to him since that last conversation last week when you told me that you had already given him and it's to pour the roof. Up until now, you have not reached out to him. So I don't know what's going on here, but this now has gotten to the point that I see where we're going, and we may have to escalate this.
Listening to that message today, I can hear something changing in my voice. I was no longer asking when the roof will be poured. I was asking whether the people responsible for making it happen were even communicating with one another. And that's a very different question. After sending that voice message, I immediately followed it with a written message in our project group chat, keeping things transparent. And you can read it. I told the contractor how disappointed Luke and I were that this roof still hadn't been poured. And from where we stood, there had been little visible progress since the end of July. And our concern was no longer simply about the delay, it had become about communication, the promised updates, the promised photographs, the promised timelines. They simply weren't coming. Then, for the first time since we started the journey, I wrote words I never imagined I would have to write. I explained that if things continue this way, Luke and I would have to seek legal advice. Not because we wanted a legal battle. Listeners, we didn't want a legal battle. But because we didn't know what other options remained. I also mentioned bringing in independent QS, a quantity surveyor, to compare the work completed against the payments already made. And then I wrote something that was probably the hardest sentence I'd written throughout this project and this journey. I said, if these issues continue, we might have to consider ending the contractor-client relationship and finding someone else to finish our home. Now, this message wasn't written in anger. It was written after months of trying to solve the problem together. I ended also with one simple request. Please provide us with a firm roof pour date and the next steps. Nothing. No reply, no update, no photographs, just silence. Hear this voice message.
And acting as the architect, this message is for you now. I'm asking on my behalf if you can kindly reach out to. Also, if you can, please kindly reach out to the concrete guy, our company, and see how that can work for us to get this
anything poured, I'm going to try on my end with others to see who can assist in this. And if you can, when you get an opportunity,
I told you that this episode will be filled with messages, and this is why I had to bring this August to you in two split episodes, 7 and now 8. So I hope you understand why it can be rushed. There's too much that happened or is happening. But if you're enjoying the journey, and I know you are, please, I beg, subscribe, share it with others, hit the notification bell, and follow the journey. Now, messaging continued between now the architect Luke and me, discussing about how best to proceed, if he could recommend the QS, if we need an attorney. We talk about the delays, the upcoming shipment, the exposed steel, the change orders that were already fully paid. Some work of them were partially started, some not yet started, and the lack of communication from the contractor. Listeners, we're going to discuss the change orders and payment schedules in another episode and how our journey was impacted by those changes. Then early the next morning, August 20th, 7:05 a.m., this message came in from the contractor. Looking back now, I was now so frustrated not hearing anything and now seeing this message. And again, now, here comes another type of emotion. I am frustrated. 1 minute later, after I got that message, I wrote 5 simple words. I said, how you doing? Why we ain't hear you? Nothing. I said, we need that roof poured. Capital letters. And then I added, for record, a list of all the key incomplete items that were already fully paid for. Sometimes 5 words say everything, because then on August 20th, the architect responded to the contractor and said how he understands he's not well, but however, it was prudent that he responds to the chat ASAP, because he said the pour is scheduled and to kindly let us know. Not a response. Then on August 23rd at 12:13 p.m., the architect wrote this, just this, at the contractor, which is at his name, call me ASAP. That's it. Simple. That simple message told me that the architect was waiting too. At that point, it wasn't just Luke and me asking questions anymore. Everyone was waiting for answers. My brothers, Luke brother, every day, what's going on? No one's here. No messages arriving. Just these few messages here. Then August 23rd, again, I sent another message and I told the architect that although we were genuinely, I sent this to the architect, that although we were genuinely sorry to hear the contractor wasn't well, that didn't mean that someone couldn't send a brief update as a professional courtesy. Man, we couldn't sleep. Luke and I, we couldn't sleep. That same night, again, at 9:34 p.m. I can't sleep, I share something I never imagined sharing. My family and I had discussed it, and I had briefly spoke to a family lawyer in Barbados about our concern. Our daughter had already contacted her connection at a Barbados law firm. She said, should we need legal representation, the person will be on standby. And I sent this urgent written notice, but directly to the contractor. And then I placed a copy in the group chat. Again, this wasn't because we wanted a legal battle. It was because we didn't know what else to do. And I ended it by saying, if we didn't hear from the contractor by Tuesday, our lawyer would have to reach out on our behalf. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't emotional. It simply requested two things: a response and a plan. Just answer me and tell me what's the plans. That's all. By now, our conversations were becoming increasingly formal and direct. Instead of asking simple questions, I prepared a detailed project record. Every construction phase, every approved change order, every payment sent, every milestone, whatever was completed, and whatever was still outstanding. Maybe that's the document controller in me, but documentation has always been my way of creating clarity. Looking back now, when the architect had said in the chat, you said the pour is Friday to the contractor, and is that still the case? That question mattered because by now everyone was trying to determine not just whether the roof would be poured, but whether everyone involved was working from the same information. That should have brought clarity. Instead, the conversation became even more complicated because soon different dates, different messages, and now different people would all become part of the same story. Before I go any further though, I want to pause and make something clear. The relationship between the contractor and me was never purely business or overly formal. Anybody who knows me knows that I can communicate with about anyone. I'm naturally sociable. I enjoy talking with people and I try to make people feel comfortable around me. Through the many conversations we had, myself and the contractor, there was always a bit of small talk mixed in with the work discussions. We talk about family, children, everyday life, things that had nothing to do with construction or business. And so because of that, I became familiar with the names of some of the people who were important in his life. Here's why I mention that. The one whose name I had heard before is now about to enter the story. And for me, this is where the journey begins to change. This is where I believe the nature of the relationship shifted and where communication moved to an entirely different level. From this point forward, the conversations, the interactions, and the dynamics were no longer what they had been before. And that's where the next chapter of this story begins, because on August 24th at 2:42 a.m., this message came in from the contractor's phone, not in the group chat, not from another new number. Well, it seems I'm up early too, because I responded to the message at 3:19 a.m. and I thank her for the update, wished the contractor well, and requested that we need a confirmation by August 26th about the roof pour. I can't read all the messages that started happening between her and I, but I will say it. From 2:42 a.m. all through 10 o'clock this morning, we were back and forth. I finally wrote this. I will respond in the group chat for transparency. Because now I would have now to go and reread all these messages back to Lou and then relay the pieces that the architect needs to know back to the architect. And plus, they need to know that someone else is now communicating about the project. This is what I receive. And I quote, "You are free to put this wherever you want to put it. But for us, we have nothing to hide." I slowly swiped the message and I read it again and again. I tried to read it so it didn't hit me as how I was reading it. Then I forwarded the entire chat that was going back and forth with us to the main group chat, and I told the group this is to keep all who have a vested interest informed and for their records. Later that day, at 12:14 p.m., the architect wrote in the group chat because he now saw the messages. And I quote, "Thank you both for sharing and keeping the team informed. It is unfortunate that we have reached this stage." Hey. Looking back now, disrespect had now entered our journey. And with thousands of dollars already spent, no roof, broken promises, no roof, ongoing delays, shipment on the bay, storms on the ocean, house not protected, water coming in as you had seen Luke sweeping out the water in the building, but the communication itself had changed. Looking back today, that's not what stayed with me. What stayed with me was realizing that transparency itself had become part of the discussion. Earlier in the project, transparency had simply existed. Now it had to be requested. That realization said more to me than the message itself. Almost overnight, the messages became different. They became longer. They became more structured, more formal. So instead of the short WhatsApp updates, there were now headings, numbered paragraphs, bullets. We were talking about contract references, financial positions, communication protocols, weekly reporting standards. The conversation no longer sounded like two people trying to build a home. It sounded like two parties protecting their positions. One of the letters received from the contractor stated items and numbered paragraphs like this. 1. Financial and contractual compliance. 2. Principal and professional conduct. 3. Delays in responsibility. 4. Communication protocol. 5. Work program. 6. Position on site value. And here this one. Here number 7. Human consideration. Hey, human consideration. Are we human? But to be fair though, that said letter also acknowledged something important. It acknowledged that the roof should already have been poured. They committed to weekly updates. It provided another promised roof date, and it outlined the company's position regarding the project. Whether someone agreed or disagreed with that position wasn't really my focus at the moment. What struck me was that the relationship had changed. I, Let me bring this cultural moment here, my little Bajan cultural moment. Growing up in Barbados, my father taught us something without ever sitting us down for a lesson. He taught us while we watched him prepare his fishing boat down by the bay, down at Skeets Bay. My fisher folks family would often say, keep your eye upon the sea. At first I thought they were talking about the waves. But as I grew older, I realized they were talking about the conditions, the tide, the current, the weather changing. Because by the time everyone else notices the storm, the fishermen had already been preparing for it. And that's exactly where Luke and I found ourselves. We weren't trying to predict disaster. We were now simply paying attention to the changing conditions. Now, let me say something because I think this is important. People get sick. Equipment breaks. Suppliers have delays. Ships get caught in storms. Concrete plants have problems. Life happens. Construction happens. But none of those things were what changed this project. What changed was the communication. And after months and months of delayed promises, updates became less frequent. Questions took longer to answer. Important conversations began moving outside the main group. Documentation became more important. It became more important than the verbal assurances. And that's when something changed inside me. At almost the same time, our window supplier was experiencing delays too. Storms in the Caribbean, what was in Colombia. Shipping schedules changing. Arrival dates were moving. But every update they sent told us exactly what was happening. This is the delay. This is why. This is the new estimated time of arrival. They weren't telling me what I wanted to hear, but they were telling me what I needed to know. And that taught me something I'll never forget. People accept delays, but what they struggle to accept is uncertainty. Because as August continued, more people entered the conversation. The architect, the lady from the contractors, lawyers, family members, professional advisors, and the messages became longer, more formal, more structured. Looking back now, I don't think the conversation changed because lawyers were mentioned. I think lawyers were mentioned because the conversation had already changed. There's a big difference. One is the cause, the other is the symptom. That was the moment I stopped relying on verbal promises. From that day forward, I wanted everything documented. And maybe, again, that's the document controller in me. But documentation became my compass. Not because I expected the worst, but because I needed clarity. Luke and I needed to understand what was going on. When you're building from nearly 2,000 miles away, builders, my diaspora friends, family, listeners, your records become your second set of eyes. This lesson had some important red flags. And as we go through this journey, we see the red flags become heavier and heavier. Today's red flags. When communication becomes more formal without corresponding construction progress. All these letters are, but nothing is moving. Repeated promises without a written recovery schedule. Yeah, it can happen tomorrow. How is it that's happening tomorrow? Critical updates arriving only after repeated follow-ups. Important project conversations moving outside the agreed communication channel, because when the letters and the back and forth was happening, no one else in the group, no one else knew. Needing documentation to replace confidence. You know, when you have to start to say, to be able to be confident and to trust, you need to put this in writing. You need to give me a letter. Today's episode taught us some lessons though. Communication is part of construction. Documentation creates clarity when conversations begin to change. People can accept delays. They struggle with uncertainty. Transparency isn't something you ask for at the end. It's something you establish from the beginning. And when building remotely, your records become your second set of eyes. Now, your call. This is your what would you do? And I'd like to hear from you. If you were building your dream house from another country and you notice the conversations beginning to change, what would you have done? Would you have waited? Would you have brought in outside professionals? Would you have handled it differently? Please leave your thoughts below, because someone watching today may be facing the very same situation. And again, please subscribe and share this podcast, please. By the end of August, a new date had finally been set. September 8th. After months of waiting, the roof we'd been promised was finally about to become reality. Luke and I watch our phones. From nearly 2,000 miles away, hoping that this time the concrete trucks would arrive and would actually arrive. The roof is finally poured, the windows and doors finally arrive, and for the first time in months, it feels like the dream is back on track. Or so we thought. Hey! September morn, we dance until the
From foreign shores, I bring the vision home. Built a legacy from concrete and from stone. Got the blueprints drawn, the white sands calling me. For the diaspora's children, planting the family tree. Building back home against the Atlantic tide. With Bajan roots and all that island pride. Watch the foundation rise, a brand new dawn in store. This ain't just building houses, it's something so much more. Yeah, it's Jackie and Luke building back home in Barbados.